Certainty does not preserve purpose. It replaces the need to remember it. What begins as a clear intention gradually becomes something that no longer needs to be recalled, only defended. The original reason does not disappear through loss. It becomes unnecessary within the structure of belief that forms around it. Over time, repetition stabilizes what was once questioned, and stability removes the conditions that required awareness. The mind does not forget purpose as an act of failure. It reorganizes around what no longer requires examination. What remains is not absence, but continuity without reference. And once continuity replaces intention, the question of purpose can no longer be asked without disturbing the identity built upon it. The belief was stated clearly at first. It was defined in simple terms, repeated across different moments, and reinforced through agreement. The conditions surrounding it allowed no ambiguity. It was presented as necessary, as self-evident, as something that required alignment rather than consideration. Questions were not rejected explicitly. They were made unnecessary by the clarity of the claim itself. The environment around the belief did not introduce alternatives. It confirmed consistency. What could not be questioned was not enforced by restriction, but by repetition. The belief remained visible, but its origin was no longer part of its presence. It existed fully formed, without requiring reference to the moment it was first chosen. A statement was made in a moment where hesitation was still possible. It carried intention, but also uncertainty. The words reflected something that had not yet settled into permanence. Then the statement was repeated, not because it had been tested, but because it had been heard. Each repetition removed a layer of uncertainty, not by resolving it, but by placing it further outside what could be expressed. The belief did not become stronger through validation. It became stronger through use. What was said began to define what could be said next. The initial purpose did not disappear. It became irrelevant to the continuation of the belief itself. Doubt appeared early, but it did not interrupt. It adjusted. It found forms that could exist within the belief rather than against it. Questions were reframed as confirmations. Contradictions were interpreted as incomplete understanding. The mind did not reject inconsistency. It absorbed it. What could not be aligned was postponed. What could not be postponed was redefined. The belief did not require coherence. It required continuity. And continuity did not depend on accuracy. It depended on repetition that no longer required awareness of its origin. A claim was restated publicly, after it had already begun to stabilize internally. The words were the same, but their function had changed. They no longer expressed intention. They reinforced identity. Once spoken in front of others, the belief could not return to uncertainty without altering what had already been presented. The statement was not defended because it was certain. It was defended because it had been made. The possibility of revision did not disappear. It became incompatible with what had already been affirmed. What began as belief became position, and position did not require purpose. It required maintenance. Contradiction did not stop the process. It reshaped it. Evidence that did not align was not dismissed. It was reinterpreted, meaning adjusted to preserve continuity. The belief did not narrow under pressure. It expanded to include what challenged it. But expansion did not restore its original purpose. It distanced it further. What once required explanation now absorbed explanation into itself. The structure of belief became self-sustaining, not because it was correct, but because it no longer depended on the condition that created it. A moment arrived where the original purpose was briefly visible again, not as a guiding force, but as something remembered. The recognition was clear, but it did not produce change. It remained internal, separate from what had already been expressed. To act on it would require withdrawing from what had been repeated. It would require acknowledging that continuity had replaced intention. The recognition did not disappear. It remained present, but unusable. The belief continued, not in ignorance of its origin, but in separation from it. Certainty increased as recognition became less actionable. The more the original purpose became visible, the less it could be reintroduced. The belief no longer depended on what it was meant to serve. It depended on what it had already become. Doubt did not weaken it. It reinforced the need to maintain it. The mind did not resolve the tension between purpose and continuation. It stabilized around continuation. What could not be reconciled was left outside what could be expressed. The belief remained coherent within its own structure, even as its origin became distant. A commitment was repeated in a moment where alternatives were no longer available. The repetition was not deliberate. It was necessary to maintain alignment with what had already been established. The belief was no longer being chosen. It was being sustained. Each repetition confirmed not its truth, but its permanence. The question of purpose did not disappear entirely. It remained at the edge of awareness, where it could not influence what had already been set in motion. There is a point where the mind can see the separation between what was intended and what continues. The recognition is precise. It identifies the distance between origin and repetition. But this recognition does not restore movement. It introduces a limit. To act on it would require undoing what has been stabilized. It would require breaking continuity to recover purpose. And continuity has already defined identity. The boundary is not between knowing and not knowing. It is between knowing and being able to change. The belief persists beyond this boundary. It continues to operate without reference to what began it. The mind carries both the original intention and the accumulated structure that replaced it. They do not merge. They exist in parallel. One cannot fully displace the other. The result is not resolution. It is continuation under tension that no longer expects to be resolved. The pattern does not end here. It does not correct itself through recognition. It repeats in the same form, where purpose is gradually replaced by the stability of belief. And stability removes the need to remember why it was formed. Each cycle does not begin from absence. It begins from continuation that no longer refers back. The mind does not lose purpose. It reorganizes around not needing it. And once purpose is no longer required for belief to persist, it cannot be restored without disrupting what belief has already become. If you found meaning here, you're welcome to explore more on Timeless Questions, where we examine history not for answers, but for understanding.